By the time the fog lifted, it was already too late to argue. The river breathed cold into my gloves. Steel rang once and went quiet, and the stopwatch in my palm clicked like a metronome nobody wanted to follow. Dawn made everything honest. You could hear water shouldering the pilings, smell oil and wet rope, feel the weight of waiting. Order sat on one bank with us. Chaos paced the other, impatient and loud. They said the crossing was impossible, but said it softly, as if softness could make it true. A colonel with clean cuffs pointed to the current and the span and told my unit to stand down. We were sidelined while others debated diagrams, while the enemy dug and across the way. Exclusion dressed up as prudence, access reserved for committees. I watched keys change hands and knew they weren't meant for us. Silence became a tool. We stopped arguing and started listening to the river's tempo, to steel cooling, to the tick of time we were being told to waste. Each click of the stopwatch felt like a door closing somewhere upriver. If the bridge wasn't there by nightfall, the advance stalled, and stalled meant bodies later. The math was simple, even if the politics weren't. I noted small things, because small things decide days like this. A crate stamped with yesterday's date, a load rating chalked and smudged, a pin bent from being rushed once before. The men across the water weren't villains. They were scared of collapse, of blame, of being remembered for the wrong reason. Fear makes noise. Competence does not. The fog thinned. Steel waited. The river kept moving. And in that quiet, I felt the moment tip from refusal toward resolve. Nightfall loomed. My hands stayed steady, my voice low always. The order to stand down echoed for a minute, then it didn't. When the voices drifted away, what remained was stillness, and stillness is where math lives. Noise wanted an argument. Silence wanted a solution. I felt the insult burn once, then cool, and I decided, cleanly, that I wasn't here for revenge. I was here for resolution. I took the impossible and laid it flat. River speed, span length, steel on hand, load pads. The stopwatch kept time, but I stopped letting it rush me. 24 hours. That was a window they'd given us. Knowing inspections and sign-offs usually chew up 3 days. The trick wasn't heroics. It was sequence. What could be measured now? What could be staged? What could wait without killing momentum? Across the bank, the officers huddled with clipboards like shields. I understood them more than they knew. A collapse doesn't just break steel. It breaks careers. Court-martial is a quiet word until it's yours. Their caution wasn't cruelty. It was fear of wearing regulations. I walked the line of crates and let my fingers read what eyes miss. Chalk fades, but pressure leaves memory. On one pallet, half erased by rain, a load rating sat crooked. The numbers smudged where someone had second-guessed themselves. It didn't belong with the rest. I didn't chase it yet. I just noted it, the way you note a spare key you might need later. Silence held. Steel cooled. The water kept moving. I wrote nothing dramatic, just columns and times, friction points and holds. When a sergeant asked what we were doing, I said, waiting for permission from physics. He smiled and stopped asking. By the time the fog thinned again, the insult had been reduced to variables. The bridge wasn't impossible. It was undisclosed. And disclosure, I knew, would require patience before motion. That meant letting the hours do their work, letting signatures sleep, letting fear burn itself out. I kept the stopwatch face down, listened to steel instead of orders, and waited for the moment when numbers, not voices, would finally ask me to move before nightfall changed everything entirely. By mid-morning, the river had turned into a ledger I couldn't close. That's what experience does. It replaces stories with columns. In the past, we'd improvise because there was no time to do anything else, shouting measurements over engines, fixing mistakes with bravado. Now, precision mattered more than speed. Silence, not swagger, was the difference between crossing and collapse. I remembered earlier builds where we learned that lesson the expensive way. One miscounted bolt once cost us 6 hours, and a reprimand that followed a good man for years. Another time, a single pin sheared under load because someone assumed steel forgives optimism. It doesn't. Steel remembers everything you ask of it. Water does too. The river kept its own books. current speed against bank composition, depth against angle, erosion against patience. So I measured again, 32 feet from near the bank to first footing. Current pushing faster near the center line, slower where silt had built up overnight. Clay on our side, gravel on theirs. Steel versus water, repeating like a warning. Every figure had a consequence. Every shortcut a receipt waiting to be collected later. This wasn't artistry. It was accounting. Others argued loudly behind us, rehearsing objections they'd already won. I'd seen that before as well. Noise feels like progress, but it rarely moves weight. Our team worked the way we always had when the stakes were real. Quietly, hands moving, eyes down, listening for what the material said back. That habit hadn't made us popular, but it had kept bridges standing. Tonnage limits ruled the day. We had steel rated for more than we needed, but only if assembled correctly. 12 bolts per joint, not 11. Torque set by feel first, then confirmed. One failed pin would redirect stress and start a chain reaction. No report could soften. I made the men count aloud anyway, not because I doubted them, but because counting out loud slows arrogance. The crate came back into my mind while I watched the waterline creep up a notch. The smudge load rating sat there like an unfinished sentence. I didn't pull it forward. Not yet. Some facts need time to ripen. Mentioning it too early would invite opinions, and opinions were the one resource we couldn't afford. I thought about the officers across the way, still circling their fears. They weren't wrong to be cautious. They were wrong to confuse caution with paralysis. The contrast was clean. Then we survived by improvisation. Now survival demanded precision. Then noise covered mistakes. Now silence exposed them early enough to fix them. I marked the ledger in pencil, because a pencil admits change. Times weights counts. No drama, just reality. The river kept flowing. The steel kept cooling, and the crate kept its secret. By the time afternoon edged closer, the numbers had stopped arguing with each other. What remained was choice, not between bold and safe, but between loud and correct. I closed my notebook, not because the math was finished, but because it was finally ready to be used. By noon, the waiting had done its damage, but it had also done its work. Silence had sorted what noise never could. I folded the notebook once, not to hide it, but to signal that the thinking phase was over. The riverbank, not the headquarters tents, was where decisions belonged. Access beats invitation every time, yet access is usually taken, not granted. I walked past the canvas walls and didn't ask permission. Inside the tent, maps were still clean, hands still pointing. Out here, the ground told the truth. I laid my own map on a crate, grease pencil already worn down, and drew the line they said couldn't exist. A straight span. No flourish. The officers followed, curious despite themselves. Exclusion had relied on distance. I closed it without raising my voice. Authority doesn't announce itself. It documents. I handed over requisition forms stamped that morning, ink still tacky. Materials rerouted, not added. No miracle steel, just timing. The call log backed it up. Depot, quartermaster, motor pool. Each call short, each answer recorded. When someone tried to argue, I slid the paper closer and let the signatures do the talking. Paperwork is quieter than shouting, but it lands harder. The stopwatch came out then, face down at first. I flipped it once for a photograph, time, date, location, because proof matters later. Keys followed, literal ones first. Truck keys exchanged without ceremony, a small clink that felt heavier than applause. Figurative keys came next. Who moved when, which inspection ran parallel, which approval waited until weight test spoke. Control isn't speed, it's sequence. Someone asked who authorized this. I said the river did. Another officer bristled, human fear flaring again. I met it without contempt. I'm not cutting corners, I said. I'm cutting overlap. That was true. Inspections still happened. Sign-off still mattered. We just stopped pretending they had to happen one after another. The law of physics allows concurrency. Bureaucracy resists it. Maps gathered ink. Grease pencil marks multiplied. Staging zones, bolt caches, weld points. I assigned tasks by competence, not rank. That, too, was a kind of key. A sergeant with steady hands got the torque checks. A private who could read water took the footing marks. No speeches, just names and nods. The plan didn't need belief. It needed execution. I felt the clock then pressing, but it no longer owned me. If you've ever been told to wait while the clock runs, stay with me. Waiting is a tactic when it serves you. When it doesn't, you replace it with movement that looks like patience to anyone not paying attention. The requisition cleared with a pause. 7 minutes that felt longer because silence stretches time. A clerk called back to confirm the stamp. I gave him the reference number and let him hear the river in the background. He cleared it. Small frictions, handled early. Keep bigger ones from forming later. Keys move again. Engines turned over. The first truck rolled, slow and deliberate. No cheer followed it, which was perfect. Noise attracts attention. Progress attracts results. Across the water, the other bank stayed busy fortifying a crossing they believed impossible. I pocketed the stopwatch without looking. The declaration was done, not with volume, but with alignment. The riverbank had become the office. The paperwork had become leveraged, and the plan had crossed a line from idea to fact. All that remained was to let the sequence outrun doubt, one quiet decision at a time. Once the plan stopped being discussed, it started being lived. Control replaced chaos not with speed, but with order that looked slow to anyone who equated motion with progress. Forklifts staged themselves like chess pieces, each movement deliberate, each pause earned. Bolts were counted aloud again. The numbers steady, almost meditative, steel clicking against steel as if acknowledging the care. Weld were timed, not rushed. Arc pause cool. Arc pause cool. Coffee went untouched, then cold, then forgotten altogether. An inspector asked for a gauge we didn't have on hand. So a messenger was sent on foot instead by truck, because roads were clogged with opinions. He returned winded, gauge wrapped in a rag. 17 minutes later than promised, which became 17 minutes written into the margin of my notes. Inspections paused the work exactly when they were meant to. No arguing. No sighing. Waiting is efficient when it's scheduled. A signature took longer than it should have because the officer wanted to reread the language, and I let him. The pause cost us time, but bought us cover. Silence does that. It absorbs friction before it sparks. The river kept its rhythm, indifferent, still warmed, cooled, and accepted its role. Across the site, noise rose and fell in pockets, but never touched us. Control is contagious when it's visible. Men stopped asking what came next because their hands already knew. Mid-afternoon, the crate came back. The smudge load rating stared up at me, finally loud enough to speak. It wasn't a mistake. It was an alternative configuration, one that redistributed weight across existing members instead of stacking it. No new steel. No added risk. Just a different sequence of assembly that doubled capacity on paper and held in practice. The open loop closed without ceremony. I called the inspector over and showed him the chalk. He frowned, then nodded, then asked for a recalculation. We did it together. The numbers agreed before we did. That was enough. The workaround didn't feel clever. It felt obvious, which is how the best ones always do in hindsight. The montage continued. Torque checks, level checks, a pause for a radio call that went nowhere because the signal died, then resumed without comment. Paper moved when it had to. Hands moved when they should. The clock advanced without being invited. If you're watching closely, notice how silence moves faster than noise. It doesn't announce itself. It just keeps going. By the time the sun tilted west, the structure had taken shape without ever asking for applause. We were tired, focused, and calm. Control held. Chaos never got a turn. The last weld cooled, the last boat seated, and the river kept flowing as if nothing unusual had happened at all. By dusk, the bridge existed without asking permission to exist. The light slid low across the river, steel catching it in thin, honest lines, and the silence we worked in all day finally had something to say. When the officers arrived, outrage came with them, loud and late, crashing against a reality that didn't flinch. They walked the span without speaking at first. Boots paused where arguments should have been. Hands touched railings they'd been certain wouldn't hold. I could see the calculation happen behind their eyes, not about victory or defeat, but about blame. Defeat could be explained. Blame sticks. That's when the paperwork came out, neat and sharp, regulation as a shield. Conditional approval landed like a gavel. Weight test before full crossing. Margins defined in ink, not optimism. I agreed without bargaining because conditions are just honesty wearing a uniform. We loaded the test vehicle slowly. Each ton counted. Every axle placed exactly where the math said it belonged. The river watched unimpressed. Keys changed hands again. Truck keys, inspection keys, timing keys. Each exchange is quiet, deliberate. The motif held. Control never raises its voice. When the gauge needle steadied, nobody cheered. We wrote it down instead. A narrow margin passed us through. Narrow enough to cause sleep later. Wide enough to stand on. Pushback followed protocol. Forms rechecked. Clauses reread. One officer argued we'd gotten lucky. I let him believe that because luck doesn't threaten anyone, competence does. Face to face, no shouting, just the hum of generators and the river moving on schedule. Approval came with conditions met, and resistance softened into compliance without apology. Night settled in. The bridge held. The first vehicle rolled across with measured hum, tires tracing the steel we had laid with patience, past versus future in every inch. The ledger balanced itself quietly. Bolts counted. Load paths verified. Margins honored. No one shouted. No one needed to. The bridge spoke for us, steady and unyielding. Credit was distributed silently. Inspectors signed off with nods instead of lectures. Men who had moved the steel, timed the welds, counted the bolts, all understood their part without argument. Consequences landed where they belonged, absorbed, noted, and then set aside. Resolution favored restraint over revenge. Always had. I watched the river take the last light, and in that quiet, I allowed myself to plan the next crossing, the next build, the next problem to solve with the same calm precision. Keys jingled in my pocket, literal and figurative, reminders that control is carried, not demanded. And then I said it low and certain, to no one in particular, but to anyone paying attention. I don't need permission to be precise. If quiet competence is your language, you already know the way.